Hello, Marketplace staff. Dane Rose here with Happiness Data. I just watched your expose of the Amazon waste stream. And, first of all, want to validate a couple of points. Amazon is incredibly wasteful in a number of different ways. I've been writing to Amazon for the past number of years. I used to get these giant cardboard boxes and open them up, and then there'd be another cardboard box that was maybe a third the size of the giant box with a bunch of packing, and then inside that was something that was so well padded and indestructible that the smaller box could have been shipped on its own. And I made a video series just photographing all of the waste coming from that, which as a shareholder in the planet, as a shareholder in the company, and as a customer, I don't want to, sometimes because I buy a lot on Amazon, my recycling box is packed full of unnecessary packing, largely from Amazon. So I'm with you on that. What I wanted to do is go over the issue in a deeper level. And here's what I mean. Amazon, I don't believe, is doing things much more wasteful than the common person. I was recently given an eviction notice during COVID at an awkward time, which meant a relatively rushed move. And during the move, there was all of this stuff that I wanted to give to a better home. The trouble is, I put it out in the free section, outside my door. We let neighbors know, anyone who wants this stuff, it's here. The trouble is that without a consumer tax on a lot of this stuff, it's so cheap to buy, and particularly in wealthy areas, which as a whole we would call the Western world, and where I live is particularly wealthy in Marin County, California. It's viewed as easier to buy it and throw it away than the hassle of moving it. And this is just being played out on a larger scale with Amazon, meaning I took, I would say, 2 trailers of stuff to the dump, meaning I rented a trailer and threw away lumber that I'd been hoping to use for other projects. It's just I didn't have a place to put it in the new house. So lots of scrap lumber got thrown away. I'm a contractor. I only have so much stuff that I can put in my garage before the neighbors start complaining, that my yard looks like a junkyard. But if I offered to give it away, it actually does take more effort to give something away than to buy it or to make the money to buy it again and throw it out. So the dump fees and the purchasing fees can be lower than the cost of figuring out how to intelligently move something. I have a perfectly good couch that I didn't want to throw away. So I paid to move it from my old house to my new house. It's sitting out in the garden. And I had my assistant try and give away this couch. I said, put it on Craigslist. It's a perfectly good couch. I bought it. I don't want to throw it away. That couch has been out there in the garden for 2 months. How do you give something away when it takes more time and energy to give it away for free than to throw it away? it would have been much easier to throw it onto one of those trailers where it would have been broken up, at the dump site. Now, here we go into then the politics of the dump site. I'm concerned about the more than 100,000 tons per year of this type of stuff that ends up in a landfill in my town alone in San Rafael, California. Now, when I approached the owners of the dump on their vast amounts of land, creating a few shipping containers where anyone could put good stuff like this there and anyone else could come pick it up and rummage through it and recycle it, they were incredibly hostile. I took photographs of all the stuff being thrown away. They were hostile towards that. The dump makes more money charging dump fees and then getting county subsidies to haul that off for landfill than recycling. They're not interested. We've got a growing homeless epidemic, and people need free furniture and also building materials to construct little shelters and sheds, etc., so that people are not on the streets in the cold. This is also politically untouchable. No one in my local media or my local governments wants to come on camera to talk about why we're actually producing more homeless people per year than we're housing in a growing trend. We've now got 2,000 and counting homeless people in my county alone. Now, to buy a house, you just can't. Houses are not for sale for less than $650,000. That's affordable housing in my county. No one can buy those on the street. And the people who are homeless and perhaps could most use a couch don't have necessarily a car to come get it. It's an incredibly awkward situation. But this couch sitting out in the garden is going to be rained on at some point, at which point it will then develop mold and be thrown in the dump, along with 100,000 tons of other perfectly good stuff in the community. And so what I'm getting at here is, first of all, that this is not an Amazon problem. It is a Western cultural problem in which time is money, and the money it takes to throw something away is less money than the cost of getting it in all of its circuitous routes to a good home, because there's no infrastructure for doing so. You look at the woman in your show who, with her 2 kids drawing and art, etc., those are paper products in a Western housing paradigm where the house of this very conservative and conscious person is made of, all those kitchen cabinets made of wood, and the housing costs and the waste that is involved in the housing industry. There were tons of waste in the manufacturer of a typical Western house, including the conscientious person. And there is no place for me as a contractor to drop those materials off in a public place, legally sanctioned, where anyone can reuse it. And when I need a scrap of wood, there's no place for me to go and get out of a pile of scrap wood. I have to go buy a whole piece of wood, cut it into scraps. That then creates a new scrap where there's no place for it to go. It goes into a landfill. So now we come to your show. And this is, I think, at the core of the Western paradigm of problem solving. Because it's what I see going on here is Amazon is doing at scale what you and I are doing as individuals. Now, the problem is the pattern, not the scale of the pattern. So if you and I get off scot-free for disposing of sofas in the dump and this and that and the other, while holding Amazon to account for throwing away, it's probably about right. It seemed like you returned about 10 items and one of them went to a shredder. Now, we are a very litigious culture, so if someone gets germs or writes a bad review or gets sick due to a returned clothing item during COVID, for example, who gets sued? Who deals with the hassle? That's a problem. You know, when you try and give, you know, if a restaurant gets sued for giving away leftover food, and then someone gets food poisoning, you see many restaurant owners will throw away 50% of their food and chase away people trying to dumpster dive. It's a similar type of problem. But when you look at the response, and I have a story that I think would be very interesting to cover because it deals with this kind of paradigm shift. So I noticed that you at Marketplace talking about waste, no one was driving a Tesla or other electric car. You drove hundreds of miles on a news story about waste polluting things in the atmosphere. And the average Westerner, you and I included, is going to generate statistically per capita 1,500 metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, is going to consume in the production of the products we buy, in the transportation of the products we buy, in the transportation of the waste we dispose of, you know, and all the shipping containers and stuff. If we really track what's going on, you and I, as a result of being on this planet, will consume 90,000 gallons of gasoline in our lifetime. That's a per capita estimate. About 30,000 gallons of gas for actually driving around in our cars. But then in order to buy a product that is where multiple items in that product were shipped from China and stuff, by the time you add up the petroleum cost of the things we consume and throw away, it's 90,000 gallons of gasoline, 102 metric tons in a landfill. That's that sofa, those scraps of wood, the other things that I couldn't give away, etc. That there's no space to put this stuff. So Amazon's doing it, you know, 1 million times bigger because they are 1 million times bigger. But they're using the same algorithm that you and I are using. You're using it to do an investigative report on the big guy. That's usually what we do in our culture. You know, we propagate these memes, and they're not very good memes overall, so there's something to be critical of. But then we take the biggest person or the biggest company at the top of that meme cycle that's just doing that same thing we're all doing at a vastly bigger scale, and we ask them to change. But that isn't going to happen when them are you and I, who's just gotten really big at doing the same thing and been rewarded for doing it. So you drive around for hundreds of miles following your tracking devices that were made with petroleum products. You fly to Rutgers University on jet-fueled planes. You bring these women along in gas-consuming cars. And my question is, what do you do with your used television equipment when it's 5 or 10 years out of date? And your boss says, get this stuff out of the house, you know, out of the TV room and bring in some new Sony material, whatever, shipped in from halfway around the globe to make these reports. What do you do with the stuff that isn't needed? Do you get paid to go online and try and give this stuff away or resell it when there's not much of a market for out-of-date electronics? Where does that go? The thing that strikes me is that the antithesis or the counterbalance to a landfill filled with Amazon returns are planted trees, are desalination plants, are there's a lot of waste generated in the manufacture of solar panels. There's a lot of energy consumed, usually not. In other words, the factories that make solar panels are not typically run on solar. So there's a lot of fossil fuels in the plastics and in the generation of the solar, energy used. And not a single tree got planted. Now, I'm guessing your report cost CBC, et cetera, with all the salaries and flights and editors involved, a good $100,000. And so you've spent $100,000 to call out Amazon for doing on a large scale what we're all doing on a small scale. And we want, of course, the government to fix what we won't fix ourselves. We won't take better care of our body. We want better health care from the government. We won't take care of our own waste stream as much. We want Amazon to take care of their waste stream. But if you hadn't done your show and hadn't put trackers, now where did those trackers ended up? Were they shredded into waste and how much plastic was consumed in that process? It's very possible that 100,000 pounds of CO2 went into the atmosphere to produce your show. And public outrage is a marketable material. So you wouldn't do it if no one in your audience wanted to watch it. Why? Because you're doing what makes you money. And so for you to go to the television company and say, we want a budget to do this show, they don't say, well, is it good for the planet or not? And you don't say, well, there may only be 5 people who watch it, but we think it's the right thing to do. Let's lose money on this. No, you do shows that you think will galvanize interest, and outrage sells, and righteous indignation sells, and large scale sell. You could have done this whole show about me in my garage. I've still got an entire trailer load of stuff that I'd like to give away for free, and I'm wondering when I'm going to have the time. I have extra clay. I went to the local artist kind of hub nearby, and I went to the only clay artist in that little community, and I said, could I give you this clay for free? He looked up at his shelf. He says, no, I've got 3 or 4 bags. I don't want it. Maybe you could try the school system. He said, but I'm sure they won't take it during COVID. So stumped again, just giving away clay for free. And there are tons of better ways of dealing with this. I think that it should be a county and state responsibility that anyone who has stuff that other people are likely to want should be able to, for free or a small fee, or for a small fee of the person who picks it up, take it to a place, drop it off and sort it. And we could be hiring our homeless rather than them panhandling on the street to have a decent job, managing this depot and turning this vast waste stream into something constructive that's better for the environment. But the local politicians I approach with this are not particularly interested, because the local people are not going to necessarily reward that as much as the things that our politicians get rewarded for. So it all comes down to the problem of consciousness. Now, if you had taken your show and spent $100,000 planting trees instead of doing a show on Amazon's waste and generating your own waste in the process, the planet would be in a better place. But who's going to pay your bills in a culture such as ours if you plant $100,000 trees with your media budget for this week's program? No one. And that's the cultural crux of the issue. Now, the same can be viewed on, and this comes into a possible idea for your program, but it's the same type of endless loop, in our culture. The smog program in California consumes billions of dollars of public money over time this is what happens with my 2001 Toyota Tundra. It's got a perfectly good engine, nothing wrong with it, no problems with the exhaust. Every 2 years, I get an automatic bill, paper, cut from a tree, not recycled, saying go do your smog test. The postman delivers that bill creating smog in the process. And it says go drive out of your way, take time off work, and go to a smog-only test place. And they will run your engine for 20 minutes, producing smog in the atmosphere, to verify what I already know, which is there is no smog. Meaning, for all the cars that get sent to the smog place, it's less than 5% that actually have a problem. But if you take the 95% of people who don't have a problem and all the gas that is spent driving to the smog place. But then here's where it gets really interesting. What if, rather than smogging cars, we took the $1.5 billion that Californians alone, and you probably have smog tests in Canada as well, but what if we took the $1.5 billion and stopped the process of millions of people driving their vehicles to a smog location to produce smog for 20 minutes? 20 minutes to drive there, 20 minutes to drive back, 20 minutes producing smog. So we've got millions of extra hours of gasoline production, supposedly to eliminate smog. Now, and then we've got the fee, and then we've got the time off work, and then we've got the time away from our families. What if every 2 years they just sent me a bill for $60 and said, like everyone else, you've got an older vehicle, statistically speaking, it could produce smog, and you could place $60 in this nonprofit and plant 60 trees. 60 trees every 2 years planted. So we're now looking at about 400 or 500 trees. If we take the amount of money, just the $66 paid to the smog company to run the engine and produce more smog, what if we took that $500 and counting and had 500 trees to show for it per person? We would be looking at 1.5 billion trees planted in California alone. Now, if 1.5 billion trees offsets the CO2 emissions of half the state, and growing, because that's just, over a, what is it? Well, it's about a 10-year period. So if we put 1.5 billion new trees, each of which last 100 years, and plant them, reclaiming desert, moderating the temperature, reducing insurance claim. When you have a forest canopy, the hot sun bounces off the canopy and the area below does not heat up as much. That cooler temperature regulation and that insulation of the forest slows down temperature volatility. It doesn't climb as quickly in the morning and it doesn't go down as quickly in the evening. That volatility reduction reduces tornadoes, hurricanes, etc. It reduces wind activity. It also cools the area down. Less air conditioning, less storms, less insurance premiums, and less wreckage and repair from major storms. So if we look at this as a whole picture, that every 10 years we plant 1.5 billion in trees, isn't that a model that works? And there isn't a huge contribution in energy for making this video, uploading it to you and you watching it, but there is some. We've got electricity producing these lights, we've got a certain amount of digital infrastructure on YouTube, etc. And if we're aware that all energy destroys our environment, all energy consumption, then to be less than hypocritical, if we just create a formula that says that, why don't I plant half a tree and contribute 50 cents for this little project alone, this 20 minutes. And you plant 1,000 trees to offset some of the CO2 emissions to do your reporting. And Amazon, plants X number of trees to offset some of their costs. That may be the most intelligent, cost-effective way out of this endless circle where one person, you report on Amazon, I report on you, everyone consumes energy, and no trees are planted. So that's a little bit of, I think, the direction that we will have to grasp as a paradigm before we simply destroy the environment more and more rapidly as we report on the environmental destruction more and more extensively, going to green festivals and racking up endless amounts of fossil fuels as we drive there, going to the Copenhagen summit on climate change in jet engines and staying in nice hotels, leaving other spaces empty. We can't consume energy out of the loop of consuming energy. And that's really the idea that I think is good to presence into this conversation. And I look forward to your response.